All right, it's time for Brian to share some opinions. This is my top 10 list of ways to demonstrate active listening. And I've got to say, there are plenty of things that we could have on this list above the 10, but I'm stretching it because I would say the majority of the good stuff is in the top 5 list. But this video was inspired by taking a look at the ICF's active listening, not markers of success, not the PCC markers, but just the bullet points under their core competency for active listening. I'm going to read that here. The coach summarizes, paraphrases, reiterates, and mirrors back what the client has said to ensure clarity and understanding. Now, we also know from this competency and powerful questioning and the markers of success for both of these that active listening is also demonstrated in observations and through powerful questions. So, as we look at this top 10 list, we're going to sort some of the different inputs from the coach that we can choose from and how we might rank them. I'll also give some of my pretty judgment heavy, maybe, opinion on each of these. But keep in mind that there's usually a place, even for some of the messy things, like we say in class. Sometimes a closed question is called for. Sometimes a suggestion for a tool or resource is called for. Sometimes the coach's interpretation is called for. But what's not called for is when the coach does those things without meaning to. So here, let's look at the things that help demonstrate active listening when the coach is really leveraging the space of coaching well. So number 10, one way to demonstrate that you are tracking is to ask a clarifying or confirming closed-ended question. Usually the coach may take the thing that the client has just said and say, hey, so this is what I'm hearing. Is that right? Now, this is somewhat similar to some of the stuff that we're going to look at with paraphrasing, but there's that distinction of, am I right? Am I on the right track? Or could you clarify this for me? There's a sense of, I'm hearing you, but I don't quite understand. So can you help me to make sure I'm on the right page? Now, why this is at the very top of the list is that it's not really a good way to demonstrate, active listening. It is demonstrating that you heard, but it didn't demonstrate that you are present and aware. And to be honest, the coach doesn't need to have all the details, and the coach doesn't have to have full alignment of what the client has in their mind. We don't have to know what's on their mind. We need to trust them. So to demonstrate better trust, we usually do avoid these confirming closed questions, but sometimes they can be useful. For instance, based on what I'm seeing in our session, it seems like we're pretty much wrapped up. Is that right, or is there anything else that you'd like to do here today? That's a pretty well closed question. It's confirming. It is acknowledging what's happened in the session. And at the end of a session, it can be useful just to check in, make sure it's okay to close it. There are times when we use that, clarifying or confirming closed question. But again, not the best way to demonstrate active listening. Next up, we have the idea of a summary. Now, a summary is between something like a paraphrase or a reiteration. It's not really getting at mirroring meaningful language. Instead, the coach is somewhat interpreting what's going on and trying to capture the main themes of what happened so far. It always makes me think of what Earl Nightingale mentions in his Lead the Field program. It's one of my favorite programs from old. But in there, he talks about how a real estate agent, and I'd say not the best real estate agent, might feel like their job is to go through a house and say, look, here's the kitchen. Hey, here's the living room. Look, here's the bedroom. Things that a child could do on their own if they walk through the house. And in some ways, that's what a summary can maybe be, or at least seem to be, from the perspective of client. When the coach is like, oh, you've done all these things. Let me replay them back. This is where we were. 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 If there's not much focus on the significance of those movements, those stages, the things we're summarizing, then it almost feels like we're highlighting the things that the client's already aware of. I mean, they're the ones that put the food on the table. They cooked it. They put it on the table. And now we're saying, hey, look, you have green beans. You have ham. You have other food that I'm hungry for right now. I don't know why those things came to my mind. And it's the client's food. It's the client's table. So summary, it can demonstrate some listening, but it's not the best way. So let's keep going down the list. Next up, we have an open informational question. Now, this is maybe a little bit more in the coaching space, but it's still not very strong in terms of a coaching input. The coach is going to still ask an open question like, when is this meeting? Or how much salary are you making now? And so on, which that sounds like a really bad question out of context. But when we hear those questions as clients, we are not going, if we were in that space, we're not going to learn anything. So the coach is demonstrating that we are aware of the theme, we are aware of the territory of where the client's coming from, but we're a little bit more focused on what we need as coaches to perform, to feel comfortable, to feel like we're well informed. And we're not as focused on their exploration with just plain curiosity. So open informational question, it's on the board, it's not that great. So again, let's keep going down. Number 7, a reiteration, straight from the language from the International Coach Federation's competencies. A reiteration is a simple restatement of what is said. Now, I would distinguish this from a paraphrase where the coach is sharing things in their own words to a degree, and a mirroring back of meaningful language where the coach is going to play back or reflect on usually key phrases and ideas, and maybe even just prompting those meaningful statements. A reiteration is replaying things that have been said practically word for word. Now, this can come into play very effectively as the person is trying to prepare for a conversation and they say the key thing that they want to say to their manager, and the coach just simply restates, reiterates exactly what the client said, word for word. And it can be great when the coach says, "How did that sound to you?" So there's definitely a place, and it can actually demonstrate a good amount of listening. But when it's done unintentionally or when it's done just out of habit, it really feels like that summary thing where the client already cooked the meal, put it on the table, and now we are acting like we almost cooked the meal. We want to make sure it's done intentionally. Next up, we have number 6, paraphrasing. I would still keep this above the top 5, even though it is a well-recognized and very much used input from the coach, where the coach offers back what they are hearing in the coach's own words. Now, that last part, in the coach's own words, is why I don't see this as the better thing to do. In coaching, the inputs that matter the most are the client's inputs. So their language, their way of saying things are more valuable than what the coach has to offer. Sometimes there is value to be found when the coach rephrases things based on the way I'm hearing it. This is how this is what I'm hearing. I'm going to play it back to you. And you don't say it word for word. It's more of your interpretation. Now, when a paraphrase is done best, in my opinion, the coach is going to hand it back. But that's what I was hearing. What are your thoughts on that? Or what were you hearing yourself say? What's your response once you hear that played back for you? So, paraphrasing, it can demonstrate awareness, and it can also demonstrate a deeper awareness of what was being said. But as with all the things we said so far, if the coach is doing these paraphrasing moments without meaning to, and we have a session where every single time the client is done talking, the coach is paraphrasing, it's not great exploration. It is not active listening. It is habitual practice that helps the coach feel comfortable. We want to move away from those habits and broaden the scope of our active listening with better options. So now let's dig into the top 5 ways to demonstrate active listening. 5 is an interpretive observation with a handoff question. I'll say an interpretive observation, meaning I can see your fear without a handoff question, is actually one of the worst ways, I think, to demonstrate active listening, because it's the coach saying that my sense of what's happening is the reality. That's not active listening. That is complete directing and interpreting. But instead to say, as I'm watching you and the way you're holding yourself and the way you change the way you're talking, I sense a lot of fear. Now that's what I was sensing though. What are you feeling right now? Now that's the interpretive observation with the handoff. There is that sense of a coach input. This is only the coach's perspective, but sometimes that outside perspective can be very valuable. Think about role playing, how this conversation is going to go with your peer as you have a crucial conversation with them. And the coach, just after the role play, they say, "Hey, if I can give you some feedback, you were communicating these things, and I just had the sense that you weren't fully bought in or committed." Now, that might have just been the way I was reading things, though. How do you feel? Or what's your response to that observation, or whatever it might be? There's that handoff question, not a closed, am I right? Right? Correct? No validating language, only open language that invites the client to make their own judgment or interpretation of the coach's interpretation. Number 4 is an acknowledgement. Acknowledgements can be a wonderful way to create rapport and connection with a client. And as long as the coach isn't just constantly acknowledging with validating language, which I wouldn't even put on that list of saying, "Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah, that's great. Great. Excellent. Wonderful." An acknowledgement looking at the characteristics, the great work, the excellent effort that the client has put into growing their awareness, the courage they're demonstrating, the vulnerability that they've offered. And when the coach provides that acknowledgement, and then we thank them for showing up like they are today, that's the coach recognizing what's happened in the session. It can be a wonderful way to demonstrate active listening. The challenge here is it's hard to bring acknowledgments into coaching too much. It's not going to be the regular bread and butter movement input from the coach. But every session should have one or two of these wonderful moments of acknowledgement to demonstrate active listening and care as part of the rapport, trust, and intimacy of the coach-client relationship. Number 3 is mirroring meaningful language. That took me a few takes to get right. Mirroring, the way I'm defining it here, is when a coach recognizes meaningful phrases, words, language, and reflects that back like a mirror. I would say this is different from restating or reiterating because that is where the coach is just kind of replaying the tape, where mirroring is where we are playing the core parts of that tape that maybe relate to the agenda, relate to the pattern of language, or just seem extra charged. So maybe it would be never again, or you hate that, or love, or any number of things. When the coach is picking up some deep, meaningful language, the coach can just highlight that, just put it right back out there. And it doesn't need to be much. It doesn't even need to have a handoff question necessarily. It's more of a prompt when done well, or it can be more of a prompt when done well. And this, again, demonstrates active listening, but it's focusing more on the client's inputs, although it is using the coach's intuition, interpretation of what is meaningful. It's usually a meaningful prompt because it is the client's language. This is especially useful when the coach is helping the person process what is most important, whether in a conversation, in a decision, or they're coming to some sort of new awareness and they use this charged language to describe, that meta language to describe what's happening for them in the moment. Number 2 is a simple, open question using some sort of client input. This is the bread and butter active listening tool. To be listening to the client, who they were when we first started working with them, who they were when we started working with them today, who they are right now, who they said they wanted to be by the end of the session, what they wanted by the end of the session, the language that they've been using throughout the session, the patterns of speech that they've been using, the change in tone and pace of speech that they have demonstrated during the session, their changes in behavior, the overall cadence of the session, moments of silence, the way their eyes are looking, all of these things, the figurative language, the meta language, all of these things are client inputs that the coach can string together and use to build a beautiful, open, powerful question. Now, of course, we could do a paraphrase or a summary or a reiteration or even a mirror, but oftentimes when a coach pauses after the client has said something meaningful and then rolls right into the next question using that meaningful language and maybe reflecting on how that meaningful language connects back to the agenda or whatever it might be, that usually continues to build a momentum almost like nothing else in the coaching relationship can. So open, meaningful, powerful questions using something from the client. Now, finally, my personal opinion, the best way to demonstrate great active listening, not the way a coach should always demonstrate it, but a very powerful, perhaps the most powerful way to demonstrate active listening is the factual-based observation with a solid handoff question. This factual observation is what we've talked about many times in the training so far, but it is when we look at what actually happened in the session, the words that were actually said, and we highlight them. I'd like to take a moment to highlight that you said never again, and when you said it, your voice was elevated and you stood up in your chair. What was happening for you in that moment? Or what did you learn about yourself now that you've said that? Or what have you learned about yourself now that you said that? What is it like to reflect on how you were behaving in that moment? We could even say, what do you make of this observation? But what's happening here is the coach is bringing up some things that are completely indisputable. The coach saw that happen. The coach heard those specific words. The coach distinguished the specific change in energy and tone and is highlighting them without any interpretation. We're just saying, these are the things I saw. And now we're going to open things up for the client to make their own interpretation of what those inputs, those things from their side mean. This is a wonderful way to demonstrate active listening because it's saying I'm fully here with you. And what matters most is just you and your ideas. You are the expert. I just saw this. I'm so curious and fascinated by what it really means. There's our top 10 list. I hope it's helpful. Take some notes here. I should have said that at the beginning, but I hope you were taking notes on these top 10 and see how you can leverage the top 5 more and more often in your coaching. Just the top 4, if you just leverage those things, they can be, that can create just the best coaching session ever. Consider ways to minimize the 6 through 10, the higher 5, in order to leverage the deeper listening skills that a coach can offer. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for seeking for ways to deepen your active listening, to offer more to your clients, and how you are just there for them and present with them.